Going to start with Zach St. John's list. He's got Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, Road Warriors, British Bulldogs, and the Steiner Brothers.
Awesome list, man. I'll pick the Rock and Roll Express out of that list. I think they're like 8-time NWA World Tag Team Champions. I think they've been NWA World Tag Team Champions more than anybody. They've competed everywhere. They're absolutely one of the best teams, and they're still competing to this day. As I said to Ricky Morton when we interviewed him last year, I never thought growing up as a fan of the Rock and Roll Express in the early 80s, I would see him wrestle live 2019. I got Tim Hartford. He's got the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors on this list, the Dudley Boys, the Freebirds, the Brain Busters, and the Rockers. I'm going to take a little something here from some of the other people on this list. First off, the Dudley Boys, ECW, WWE, the WWE's version of WCW, Impact, and IWTT World Tag Team Champions. Plus, they were all Japan's World's Strongest Tag Determination League champions in 2005. The Dudleys have basically been champions in every major promotion in the U.S. and Japan. This is a good list right there. You have the Freebirds, who are obviously big in UWF in Texas, and then with Jimmy Garvin, they would be tag team champs in WCW, Brainbusters, the Rockers.
Now, my brother brings us our next list. He's got the Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, Rockers, the Young Bucks, Legion of Doom. Obviously, we're going to see Legion of Doom on a lot of lists. You notice my brother has Rock and Roll Express, the Rockers, the Young Bucks. And you can see how almost that wrestling archetype has been passed down through the years. Do you think Matt and Nick will have as long a reign as Ricky and Robert have?
No, just because that I don't think it's going to exist anymore. Mike Flynn's list, number one was the Young Bucks. When you consider their impact and their success everywhere, match ratings, merch sales, and being a huge part of the AEW upstart, I think they're the best ever. All right, then he's got the Road Warriors, Edge and Christian, the Rock and Roll Express, and the Hardy Boys. Good to see ENC and the Hardy Boys on that list too, because that's another golden era of tag team wrestling.
And do you think that's why that FTR Young Bucks match is so exciting, or is it just because they've built it up for so long?
I mean, there's no denying, they represent two different things, but that's part of it, right? That's part of the great rivalry. But then what's the other part of the great rivalry? The build. And this is something we never thought we might see, and now it's just a question of when.
Let's bring it up with Scott. He's got the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, the Road Warriors, the Hardy Boys, the Dudleys, and honorable mention, Edge and Christian. We got Jake St. John, author, friend of the show, co-contributor. He's got the Road Warriors, the Rock and Roll Express, who he hates them, but they deserve the spot. Midnight Express, Eaton and Lane, Arn and Tully, Hart Foundation, and the Jake rules in effect. He also has the Dudleys and ENC.
Yes, he does. That's a good combination. You know what? Before I get confused here, let me read off Randy's list. Because he's got the Road Warriors, Edge and Christian, the Rock and Roll Express, and I like this one, the Von Erich and Iron and Tully. Von Erich were a great family, great dynasty. I'm assuming he's talking about the older Von Erich. However, obviously,
who would be the most obvious tag team of the older one? Is he talking right? David and Kerry? Is he talking Kevin and Kerry?
Well, that's the thing.
Is he talking Mike and Chris?
Nobody talked about Mike and Chris ever.
Is he talking about Lance and Chris?
Nobody's talking about Lance. I mean, we got the Freebirds on this list too, and we got obviously they're a 3-man team, but you also had Gordy, obviously part of a 3-man team, but we've had Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin. So, people throw names out there to Von Erich. They're a great 3-man team. You could interchange a lot of them. Maybe not the names Joe mentioned.
I mean, I would almost argue that Ross and Marshall have reinvented the Von Erich idea as a tag team, would you say? Like, when you say Von Erich's tag team, that's who I think of.
When you say the Von Erich, I still think of the legendary, their uncles and father. But Ross and Marshall are really exemplifying that old school style in a new school life. I think they're like MLW's classic in a modern era white meat babyface. They are good. I said this to them in the interview we had, I'm pretty sure. Where when you go back to that old school interview with Kevin Von Erich and something to promo on the Freebird, this isn't Georgia versus Texas. This is decency versus filth. That's what I think of Ross and Marshall. They are the decent human being versus the filth of concrete unit or something.
Our next list comes from Jesse. He's got the Hardy Brothers. He's got the Motor City Machine Guns. He's got the Road Warriors, the Rockers. And Do It For Her, the team of Seth Rollins and Jimmy Jacobs. We had to look this up before the show. It's a Wrestling Society X team. And a surprising pick, but I will look into them.
I got AJ's list here. He's got the Road Warriors, the Briscoes of Ring of Honor, Midnight Express, the British Bulldogs, and the Brain Bucks. It was interesting he made sure to include the Briscoes in there.
And I was surprised that it was the ROH Briscoes and Jack and Jerry.
I think he's just trying to keep us on our toes.
The last list I got left is me. I got the Rock and Roll Express, the Steiner Brothers, obviously the Legion of Doom. I went with the Miracle Violence Connection, that's Williams and Gordy. And I had FTR, but I had to take them off and put on Midnight Express because I couldn't believe I left them off.
It's a good list, and I want to go right into my list just because I also had Williams and Gordy on my list. Guys, they are 5-time All-Japan Tag Team Champions. That Tag Tournament League in All-Japan I mentioned earlier, I think it's the world's strongest determination league. They were winners of that in 1991. They were the NWA/WCW Tag Team Champions. And I mean, they held both versions of the belt because NWA was actually in WCW at the time. They did NWA tournament under the WCW umbrella, and Williams and Gordy on both. They were basically the team that came in and kicked the Steiner Brothers' ass, which was never done. Midnight Express are there. The Brain Busters, come on, Iron and Tully were masterful in WWE and NWA. Steiner Brothers are my all-time favorite tag team. They're making the list. I mentioned this in a debate I had with AJ recently that they just were innovator of tag team moves, whether it was the Frankenstein or there was the Bulldog off the top rope that Rick would hit, sometimes off of Scott's shoulders. And then there was also a move, or I don't know if you remember this, Joe, or saw this, they would do on prelim wrestlers. Rick would basically have like a prelim wrestler on his shoulders on the rope. Scott Steiner would climb the top rope and then DDT the preliminary wrestler off of Rick Steiner's shoulders.
Oh, yeah, I believe I'm familiar with that. I've seen it a time or two. Scott Steiner can still hit that Frankensteiner to this day.
Yeah, I want to make sure I don't get finish off my list. Number one on all our lists, the Road Warriors, LOD, Animal, and Hawk.
Now that we're going to a top 3, Road Warriors definitely move on.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Who is after them? I see a lot of Midnight Express, a lot of Rock and Roll Express. A lot of Brain Busters.
Well, let me look here, Joe.
You want to do Rock and Roll versus Midnight, and who do we line up for the other spot?
I'm seeing Edge and Christian on a few lists here, too.
Edge and Christian maybe versus the Dudleys?
Okay.
Or how about versus the Hardys? The Hardys are on a few lists.
You know what? Actually, I'll go Dudleys. I think they had more success than other promotions, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're just more of a tag team to me.
So if we're going to pick Rock and Roll or Midnight, who do you pick?
What do you want to base this off? Who's the best pure tag team? As far as tag team in the ring goes, Midnight Express. As far as, like, success overall, Rock and Roll Express still doing it, baby. Can't be stopped.
I feel like it's tough. You almost got to go with the Rock and Roll because they're still going to this day. Right. I mean, shit, it's going to be Ricky Morton versus Joey Janela at Joey Janela's Spring Break 4. So, all right, Rock and Roll's got to move on. Sorry, Midnights.
Edge and Christian versus the Dudleys, so I'm not biased. I am a much bigger fan of Edge and Christian. I enjoyed their work together. But when you look at overall through promotion, the Dudley Boys, man, oh man, I mean, WWE, ECW, Impact, Japan, to me, they move on.
I know, isn't it Conrad who jokes around that they're the most decorated tag team in tag team wrestling? But it's almost true.
So that will be, we're going to have LOD, and then LOD's going around. And let's just talk about it right now. We're competing. The Dudleys and the Rock and Roll Express are competing right now for number 2 here. This is what it is, man. Ain't no doubt about it.
Yeah, and it's not even just that Animal died today, but it was
we had this list planned out before that, and we asked everybody's listed in advance, and everybody had the Road Warriors on.
Just their impact on tag team wrestling. They were one of the most feared tag teams in a sport that is predetermined. They instilled fear in their opponents because they presented such a real presentation.
How many preliminary wrestlers have spoken and said they didn't want to see their name on the booking sheet against the Animal and Hawk?
As much as I like the Dudleys, I feel like Rock and Roll's got to get that number 2 spot just for how long they've done it. Their spot in the game. They were NWA tag. Yeah, they were NWA tag champs last year.
Rock and Roll's here to stay.
So this is the first time we've done this the opposite way. We picked our number 1. We picked our number 2. And sadly, the Dudleys are our number 3.
Not so sadly. They're in great company. Don't cry for the Dudleys boys tonight, all right, folks? This was a great, great list with a lot of great news.